so fascinating, I think, and encouraging, and so much clarification, I would say. I made some notes, and I put some sort of questions for the open conversation. One era, I think, one entry into this and combinator is the importance of the interpretation of the Bible. I mean, what we read the Bible, but how do we understand it? What is the meaning? And of course, linked to that is not only the ability to read, but also to understand. And that's a hermeneutical issue. What makes us understand what makes meaning to a text? If I open that kind of broad opening, please respond on that.
Yes. Well, Dr. Lennartsson, let me first say I really enjoyed your talk, and of course I agree with all of it. You've gone more deeply into that, I'm sure, than I have. But your opening question about interpretation of the Bible, hermeneutics, I think is so important, particularly for Protestants, because Protestants tend to talk about sola scriptura, that their final authority is Scripture alone. And of course, they get that from Martin Luther. But what I think this discussion of Jews and God's covenant with the Jewish people and God's giving of the land to the Jewish people, this question of supersessionism, on which there is huge disagreement amongst Protestants. And you referred to Telbe and N.T. Wright, and they radically disagree with you and me and Brad on, as you put it, what all Israel means, and also on almost all these questions. And yet, they're both Protestants. Tom would say he's a Protestant, and he would say his final authority is Scripture. I would guess that you're a Protestant. You say your final authority is Scripture. I'm an Anglican, and we're sort of weird. We're in between Catholics and Protestants. I call myself a Catholic Anglican. But what it shows is that that everyone brings a grid, a lens of interpretation to the Bible when they read the Bible. And there is no naked Bible that's easily accessible apart from our grid, our tradition, our interpretive tradition. And so I had been laboring under a supersessionist tradition for decades. I learned the Greek New Testament in high school. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and I went to a Jesuit high school. And I've been reading the Greek New Testament since I was 18. But it wasn't until my 40s, or actually the end of my 40s, and maybe it was, it was the end of my 40s, that I started to see some of these things, that I have been reading the New Testament, even in Greek, with this veil over my eyes.
Right.
So to answer your question, yes. I think one thing that the question of Jesus as a Jew in Judaism has been showing us is that there are traditions of interpretation, and we must pay attention to what tradition of interpretation we are using when we go to the Bible.
Right. Yeah. And that's a matter of honesty in between scholars, and awareness among general readers, because my experience is that most people, that they are not aware of the glasses they are carrying. They are tuned, the glasses, but you get so accustomed to what you see, so you think that is the reality.
Yes.
That's one thing. And another thing is, it's very interesting because both these scholars that I mentioned, Telbe and Wright, explicitly deny, I am not a supersessionist.
Yes, yes. Well,
so they try to define the outcome, sort of, the result of their interpretation is that the people of Israel has lost the covenantal calling. They are not any longer Sinai. But I think that both of them, that's my understanding, my interpretation of what they claim, both of these two guys, that as individual Jews, they are welcome in the church.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
So, and that is the tricky part, because not everyone hear that difference between so how do you say, disclaiming Israel from the heritage from Sinai, and still Jews are welcome.
Yeah, I don't know Telba, but I know Tom. Tom's a friend of mine. I have hosted him in the States several times for days on end. We are fellow Anglicans. I love Tom. He's a man of God. Yeah. But he knows my stuff, and he knows that I say he is a supersessionist. The only way he can say he's not a supersessionist is by redefining the word. And the way I define supersessionism is twofold. Number one, the people, and number two, the land. First, the people. God no longer has a permanent covenant with the Jewish people. He turned away from that covenant in 30 AD when Jesus came. And number two, the land. The land of Israel is no longer theologically significant. And Tom Wright is very explicit about that. He says it is not the Holy Land anymore, despite the fact, as I tell Jewish audiences, well, and Christian audiences too, 5 times in the New Testament, Jerusalem is called the Holy City. 5 times, the Holy City. Well, Tom Wright might not see Jerusalem, and of course, Jerusalem there stands for all of Israel. Tom Wright doesn't see the land as holy anymore, but the authors of the New Testament do.
Right.
And I am more concerned about what the authors of the New Testament believed than at this point what Tom believes.
Yeah, and that is, of course, the what do you say, the main issue. I mean, where everyone claims to read the Bible in an honest way, and you just read, don't read into it something. Right. At the same time, and I hesitate now to speak about these two persons, but I mean, Telbe and Wright, I don't want to, speak about them, but in a kind of general sense. At the end of the day, I sense that they leave the ambition of reading the text historically. Sometimes they leave that drive, because that is what I try to tell, lay people, church people, because I'm out very much in the churches and try to speak in a way that people understand it, general reader. And I say, we need, when we go to the Bible, we need to read the Bible and just apply it. This is the food that we need, the spiritual food. But at the same time, if we go deep into it, we need to do the travel in time, a journey of time. We need to put ourselves back in the feet of the disciple, in the sandals, so to speak, of the disciples, just to understand Jesus. And sometimes I think ambition is, from a scholarly perspective, to do that. But in the method, they drop it sometimes. Yeah. Because they redefine words out of our context instead of putting the meaning of the text in the context of the writer and the listener.
Right. Yes. No, I think you're absolutely right. You know, on N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, he's really good on the Jews up until 30 A.D. He's wonderful. And he has taught the churches that we misunderstand the gospel if we leave the history of Israel out. If we go straight from creation and fall and skip ahead to Jesus, skipping over the history of Israel, Tom Wright is right in saying that misses the gospel. The gospel is very Jewish. But unfortunately for Tom, after 30 A.D., the Jewish people and the land of Israel drop out. And, you know, my guess is, and I think you were, you know, you said in your lecture, Göran, if I could call you Göran, now, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, Göran. Yeah, that's fine.
Göran. You said in your lecture, you know, you don't want to speculate on motives, and I can't either. But I think probably what has happened to Tom is what's happened to so many scholars is he was raised. He was educated at Oxford. He had a mentor who was very, very important, and he brings him up frequently in his books. And I've read almost all of his academic books. I haven't read all of his popular stuff, but and I think he was educated in supersessionism with the supersessionist model, you know, in a very sophisticated way, of course. And he made it work for him. And of course, he did his dissertation on Paul, I believe. And so he way back at the beginning, when he first got his PhD and published that first book on Paul, you know, coming out of his dissertation, he was already putting into concrete this supersessionist model for understanding Jesus and Paul. And you know, and then he wrote book upon book upon book upon book, and then he started this history of the New Testament. And once you know, build your house, your theological house, and it really works for you, and it's comfortable, it's pretty hard to want to move. You just don't want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I noticed, I mean, the general Bible reader, church people, of course, we carry on the theological heritage by the way we speak naturally. I mean, if the teacher says that speak about the early Christian church in Jerusalem, I know the meaning of it. I understand why you're saying that. The believers of Jesus, well, that's a Christian.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you drop the sensitivity of the text because you lose the, how should you say, presupposition of the text, namely, they are all Jews.
Right.
And the Christian is coined maybe 7, 8, 10 years later in Antioch. So it's an easy way of sort of helping people to understand that the common way of speaking is also some kind of, it's a narrative.
Yeah. Göran, I think that happens too when millions of Christians sit in their pews week after week on Sunday.
Yeah.
Well, it's over 1 billion. And they listen to their priest and their pastor talk endlessly about Jesus Christ. Now, it's right to talk about Jesus Christ, but they don't know the meaning of the word Christ.
Right.
I think most Christians think of Christ as Jesus's last name.
Yeah, sure.
Like Lennartsson and McDermott.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why when I preach, and even when I do the liturgy, now I'm an Anglican priest and I celebrate the Eucharist. I, as much as possible, replace the word Christ. I don't use the word Christ. I say Jesus Messiah.
Yeah.
And that tells people in the pews, ooh,
right.
Messiah. Oh, that's a Jewish word. Oh, and it sort of reminds them, wait a minute, we are dealing with a Jewish man here.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do more of that.
Yeah. That's why Brad Young's approach to the Bible translation to bring kind of the fresh original meaning to it, the connotation that the listeners linked to the words, that's very important. Well, I have the same experience because I know myself, when I discovered, as you said, I'm Göran Lennartsson. I thought Jesus was the Christ, Jesus Christ, his family name. That's what I thought because that's what the way you used it. And of course, it might be that some of the uses of Christ could be as a name. Yeah. It turns to become a name later on, but not in the New Testament. So you lose the Jewish original power of the title and the connection, of course, to the people. And Christianizing, sorry for interrupting, but we are Christianizing Jewish concepts.
Right. And I think we also need to teach our people in the pews that Christian means messianic. Mm-hmm. That Christianity is that messianic religion. It's literally what it means. It's the religion of the Messiah. Yeah. It's messianity. That's what Christianity is. It's messianity. That's where supersessionism started. It started when the faith moved out of what's now Israel to the Gentiles up in Syria. Of course, we know that in Antioch is where they first started to be called Messianics. I mean, we say Christians, but Messianics. Yeah. And it's when the early leaders, when the second generation of church leadership became Gentile, and they lost contact with the Jewish root. That's when supersessionism starts, with the loss of that knowledge and probably flesh and blood contact with Jewish believers, where we're saying Galatia, which was probably 95% or 100% Gentiles in the Galatian church, and I made that point, and I'm sure you know it too. That's I think a key to understanding Galatians 6:16. So in the Galatian church, when you had 95 to 100% of the people in the pews, I mean, they didn't have pews, but are Gentiles. Yeah. And then their second generation is raised up and starts teaching with little to no knowledge of the Jewish roots. That's when supersessionism starts to take hold. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a long journey to rediscover, to reconquer the understanding that the first generation of believers had from the text, from the reading, and from the teaching.
Yes.
So what? Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, we're also finding out more and more that probably every single author of the New Testament was Jewish. Now, of course, Luke. Luke's Gospel and Acts. Scholars frequently have said, well, he probably was a Gentile, but there's more and more evidence that he probably was a Jew who was raised in a Hellenistic context, and so Greek might have been his first language, but that he probably was a Jew. There's so that's why it's probable, I think. And the scholar named Isaac Oliver wrote this superb book that I think 100 years from now, if our world lasts that long, New Testament scholars are going to look back at his book called Luke's Jewish Eschatology, published by Oxford 2 years ago. I think they're going to look back.
Yeah, Oliver.
Yes.
I read it. It's very good, extremely good.
Great book, and I think it's it's going to be one of those landmark books.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's the one who makes an extensive argument about Luke being Jewish.
Yeah, and definitely, if he's writing to Theophilus, which probably is as a man of flesh and blood, and he assumes so. Maybe he's could be a Gentile. A Jew could be, or he is, a God-fearer. But anyway, it's so soaked in with the biblical and Jewish way of thinking. So unless you know the text and all the culture and the Jewish thinking, you're dropped out quite early, both Acts and Gospel of Luke.
Yeah.
So definitely there's a heritage that was lost, unfortunately, quite early.
Yeah.
So how can we reconquer that? How can we pick up?
Well, I mean, you and I have to keep writing and speaking.
Yeah.
And Brad Young, I mean, I've got my giant magnum opus book of a lifetime coming out in April. And it's the story of redemption from Eden to the New Jerusalem. And so it's and at the center of it is the story of Israel. So it's Israel centered. And your writings, your books, and importantly, training the next generation. Through our universities, through our seminaries, training these young pastors, so they preach about eudioi in the Gospel of John, as Brad was just talking about. That John is not anti-Semitic, as you and I know. So many 20th century and 19th century scholars have said the Gospel of John is anti-Semitic. No, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
So I think education, training the next generation, and preaching and teaching.
I look forward to the book that you are working on, the main opus. Would you call it a biblical theology?
Yes, it's definitely a biblical theology. It combines biblical theology, church history, and systematic theology.
Yeah. That's excellent. My experience is also that young people, well, the need, first of all, in Sweden at least, Christians need to be readers. Christians need to, be touched by the Word of God, and not only services and so on. They need to have the daily dose of the Bible and get interested in it, want to go deeper and mature in their understanding. And my positive experience of that need is that if we open up this perspective, people get so curious about it.
Yes.
So I think it's a good hope. There's a good chance to meet the needs of evangelism, of course, but also teaching in the churches, that this is a help. The original, the perspective of the first generations of Jesus followers and what it means and so on. That is, I think, a very, it makes the study interesting. It's a teaser for many people.
Yes, I found that my students at the seminary, once they hear about this, that there's an entirely different way of looking at the New Testament,
right? And
things pop off the pages of the New Testament that never did before. They get real curious. Now, of course, unfortunately, and I think you were just alluding to this, they aren't reading many books these days. Even seminary students, they listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
So I think we have to do more and more podcasts, and we have to do things like this. And thank God that I don't know if this was your idea or Anders' idea or Brad's idea, Anders' idea. It's wonderful. May God rest his soul. I'm so sorry to hear that he died. But things like this, I think we need more in-person conferences too.
Right. Yeah.
There's something about the flesh and blood, and we learned this since COVID, right? We miss so much by not meeting in person. So maybe a future in-person conference in Sweden, I think would be good.
Yeah. And also traveling, meeting people, connecting with people, going to Israel, meet the people, meet Palestinian believers, meeting with Orthodox rabbis, meeting with Messianic Jews. That's also my experience. I would have tried to be doing that over the years.
Yeah.
And that is also, something happens when you meet, as you say.
Absolutely. The word became flesh.
Yeah.
And our word about post-supersessionism in a properly Jewish way of reading the Bible becomes flesh when flesh meets flesh.
Right.
I'm flying to Israel tomorrow.
Wow.
And, I don't know if you've heard of you probably have. We're on the International Christian Assembly in Jerusalem. And they're starting on Sunday, their 1 week long Feast of Tabernacles celebration.
Right.
So I'm going to go be part of that. And so I'm going to meet, many new Messianic Jews. I'm going to meet many Gentiles from around the world who have come to that. And I have lots of non-Messianic Jewish friends, some of whom who are coming to at least one of these meetings.
And what I notice, and my impression is that is increasing also. That, let's say, for 30 years back, it was a quite tensed relationship between the Orthodox community and the Messianic. At least parts of those dividers are now differently. It's different. It's not so hot any longer, it seems.
Yes, I've noticed the same thing. 30 years ago, when I first started going to Israel, I was told that for Orthodox Jews, and most of my friends are modern Orthodox and ultra Orthodox. Messianic Jew is worse than a child molester.
Right.
Well, that was 30 years ago. Now I've got several Orthodox Jewish theologian friends, and I do work with them over in Israel. And they're very aware. Well, they actually have brought some Messianic Jewish scholars into our midst to help together train the next generation. Now that has to be under the radar. That has to be kept very basically secret. But more and more of these secret meetings and collaborations are taking place.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think two things that also, and Ingrid mentioned that Messianic Jew believers, scholars among the Messianic believers, produces material to help us Gentile believers to understand the Bible better. I mean, we are being blessed now also with that contribution from the Messianic believers. It's all eye-openers for us. And the second thing is that I think it is a testimony that we Gentile believers relate to the Messianic Jews, because that show that we don't have a problem any longer as Christian confessors of Jews, the identity of being a Jew.
Yes.
I think that is a key.
Well, it is a key, particularly these Messianic Jewish scholars like Mark Kinzer and David Rudolph, who still live a Jewish lifestyle.
Right, exactly.
And for them, it's very important because and also for Orthodox Jewish scholars like the late Michael Wishograd, who was a friend of mine before he died, and I count that as one of my great privileges.
Mm.
He said, "Look, you Christians, you are doing a disservice to Israel and to the Jewish community if you convert a Jew and then make him basically into a Gentile by not keeping up Jewish practice, because then we lose one more Jew to the people of Israel worldwide, and our numbers are getting smaller and smaller, and the world is against us." Yeah. So his advice to us is to be sure that we encourage Jews who see Jesus as their Messiah to live as Jews, and try to find a space for that within our Christian communities. And of course, the great English Catholic scholar and theologian Gavin DaCosta is working on that in the Roman Catholic communities, and progress is being made in Rome, and even they've got a voice in the Vatican. And there are all these Messianic Jewish communities, and more and more, I think Messianic Jews are starting to realize that they shouldn't just live like Protestant evangelicals, as if there were no difference.
Yeah. No, I like to foresee this, because that will be also, how should I put it, a blow to the Christian history, where we not only dropped our heritage, but we built a wall against not only Jews, but believers, Jesus believers with a Jewish identity was not accepted. They could not be baptized. So we have to tell the world and the Jewish world today that we have changed, that Christians have changed, and sort of making up for that old, very bad theology that we are, as Christians, we have that as a part of our heritage in a historical sense. So we have to make up with that.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Yeah, it is a very comfortable and interesting and encouraging conversation, and there are many topics we could agree on more, but I think this webinar has been a way of addressing these issues in a format that might be attractive and useful. And I think we have a good mix of different inputs to the overall theme. That the anti-Semitism, Christian anti-Semitism, to cut the roots. And that was Anders Gerdmar's contribution, among other things. But I think that was, the burden he had, to cut the roots, cut the throat of anti-Semitism. And from that, we build up the not anew, but we rediscover the original, and we make it contemporary. Right. So that's a vision.
Yeah. No, I was going to bring up one point about your talk. Your fascinating discussion of the term "all Israel," and I think I agree with everything you said, and I've done some thinking about that term too over the years, and I've noticed how frequently it comes up in the Old Testament. Those two words, all Israel, and of course, most importantly in the Septuagint, because that was the Bible of the early church. And as you pointed out in the Mishnah, in Book 10, the Fathers Avot, and the example I always use when Christians ask me about that phrase, "all Israel will be saved," I mean, what does that mean? And I said, well, think about in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, when Achan sins, and they stoned him, and it says all Israel stoned him.
Right.
And I said, look, 600,000 came into the land. Maybe it was 800,000 by then, with all their children and so forth. Do you really think that 500,000 people gathered up stones to stone one guy? It would be physically impossible. No, it probably means representatives from the 12 tribes.
Right.
Were probably chosen, because to have more than 12 people throwing a stone at one man to kill him is really superfluous and actually extremely unwieldy and just impossible physically.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a clue right there, that all Israel doesn't mean every last Jew,
right?
But representative. And Isaac Oliver makes, I think, a very good argument in his book, Luke's Jewish Eschatology, that Jesus is going to restore the 12 tribes.
Right, right.
And so all Israel, part of that means a restoration of the 12 tribes. Yeah. All 12.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I've been I have a project writing a book on Romans 9-11.
Oh, whoa!
Since more than 10 years. So I've been working not full time with it, but I realized early that this is a project, really.
Yes.
And I have progressed also to dig into, so I can confirm that my studies now. Partly, I don't see if this comes through, but this is a book from the early...
Yes, Restoration, Old Testament Jewish and Christian Perspectives, James Scott.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. And he goes through...
Okay.
There's some 10 pages here, but all references he goes through. I counted myself... In Septuagint, according to Ralph's edition, that's 144 times Pas Israel. 144 times.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a biblical term.
Yes.
You shouldn't speculate today as a theologian, what might this be possible to interpret? How much can I sort of put into it? No, it's a biblical term. So, of course, the way I figure out thinking is that, of course, at least some of the people in Rome that had the letter of Romans read to them aloud. I mean, they heard it be read. Yes. They knew the text, they knew the Septuagint, and they associated, they connected that to the Old Testament, of course, and Paul himself, of course. I mean, that's that's self-evident sort of. And he says basically when he goes through, I think it's 4 connotations. One is it's the northern tribe, the sort of lost 10 tribes in the north, or 9 tribes, connected to Judah and Benjamin. So it's the reunited nation. That's one connotation. Another is a summary of the leadership, those representative from the people. That's all Israel. I mean, the main groups.
Yes.
And then it could be the multitude, the people gathered. Not necessarily every individual, but it was something joint. Not one particular group, but it was the people, united. So I think that is what you're saying is also, I think, documented. And that this... If maybe it wasn't very much used in the contemporary literature. I think, for instance, in Josephus, he doesn't use the word. It could be out of fashion, maybe, or he had no reason to use it. But it is carried into the rabbinic tradition, obviously. Yes. So it is not a dead phrase. Right. It is something alive.
And Paul was not making this up. This was not a new term. Same thing for circumcision of the heart, that Romans 2 passage that you used in your lecture.
Yeah.
And so many Christians, including N.T. Wright, supersessionists, take that passage at the end of Romans 2 and say, see, Paul is disassociating himself from belief in physical circumcision. He says all that matters is circumcision of the heart. And I was raised, and I studied New Testament at the University of Chicago, back about 100 years ago. And I was raised being taught that Paul makes this up, that this is a Pauline invention. Well, then in the last 25 years, as I've been studying these things, I realized Paul is getting this from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Right, exactly. It's circumcision of the heart is explicit in and also Ezekiel. Yeah. So Leviticus, twice in Deuteronomy, and then at least once or several times in Ezekiel.
And the logic, sorry.
So Paul is not doing new things here. No. And the typical New Testament scholars and theologians think Paul is doing a whole new thing here. Jesus is doing a whole new thing here. No. This is all from Torah and Tanakh.
Yeah. And I don't get the logic either. If Paul is saying that I could say that as a church minister also, every member of the church, every registered member is not automatically a believer.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you go to Augustine, he says the same, basically. Right. But when Paul says that when he phrases it, that all Jews are not Jews unless they are circumcised, right, it doesn't mean that Gentiles become Jews.
Right.
Because that is also used sometimes for some people as an argument. Well, that Paul is also including Gentiles as if they are Jews. Yeah. And it doesn't make sense to me.
And this was a common thing among the rabbis and in Mishnah. And so the oral tradition that Paul was schooled in amongst and Jesus was too, the Pharisaic or oral tradition frequently talked about that not all who are from Israel are really of Israel. Paul, this was not a new saying either.
No,
this came from the rabbinic tradition. Jews were well known of accusing one another of not being true Jews, of not truly being of Israel, and we see it today when tourists go to Israel, Christian tourists on pilgrimages, and they're so shocked that so many Israelis seem to be so very secular. Now, of course, secular over there means something different from secular in Sweden or in the United States. But they're so shocked. All these Jews who don't go to synagogue and don't keep kosher all the time, blah blah blah. But there's a long Jewish tradition of and my modern Orthodox Jewish theologian friends who are not Messianic, they tell me themselves that we regard a lot of these secular Jews, especially in the United States, who are doing and saying so many terrible things, as not truly being of Israel. They are blaspheming the name because they've lost their faith in God. So we Christians say the same. And you just mentioned St. Augustine. The church is the ark with clean and unclean animals, and there are lots of unclean animals on that ark, and many members of churches who will be disowned on the last day at the final judgment. Yeah. So this is a very Jewish thing, and we we ought to recognize this as Christians, as we have talked also. Right.
We need not to sit on high horses here. And of course, Isaiah, he's criticizing. That's the word, the least thing you can say about his analysis of the people. Elijah, he thought he was the only one, the only believers in the people, and the whole history of Israel. in perspective of that sort of tradition, that historical pattern, it is nothing new what Paul is experiencing. But in Romans 11, he have confidence that at the end there will be a change. All Israel.
Yes. It's a theology of the remnant, and that's thoroughly Jewish. It's all through Tanakh. It's through Torah and the prophets. It's nothing new for Paul. Paul is bringing in Old Testament theology in to his letter to the Romans, a theology of the remnant. And we're seeing this now in the Western world.
Yeah.
That the church is dwindling down, and the true church is going to be a remnant church. So
I'm noticing now that the time here is 21 hours. You are later.
It's 3 o'clock here.
Yeah.
3 p.m.
So our time slot is coming to an end. Let's put not a full stop, but a comma. The conversation will continue.
Nice. That's very nice. Good. I like that. I like
speaking to you and this conversation, and we need this to develop like a fire into the Christian world.
Yes.
They will be helpful for the Jewish nation, for ourselves. We will grow as believers and mature in the faith, and that will also attract the non-believers to come to Jesus.
Yes.
So thank you so much, and God bless.
Well, Göran, thank you, and it's been great to meet you. And I hope we can meet in the flesh someday and have a conference face to face.
Yes, and have a safe trip to Israel and bring blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.